China. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is CV Viverito. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the Associate Director of Global Initiatives here at Out and Equal. And to start us off today, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Erin Uritus, the CEO of Out and Equal, to start us off.
Thanks, CV, and hello, everyone. I'm really excited and honored to be with all of you today. I want to thank all of you for dialing in, and to especially thank Charlene and Curtis, Ivy and Raymond, and all of our friends at Shanghai PRIDE with whom we have been collaborating since 2017. I'm not sure who knows this part of my story, but when I joined Out and Equal as the CEO, I had come from another NGO who focused on international education. Well, I was doing business development and helping open and serve international schools in the Middle East and further east, including 2 of our schools in Shenzhen. I was living in the Emirates at the time, and I remember observing how I interacted as I moved in and out of spaces that were more or sometimes less LGBTQ inclusive, and how comfortable or not I felt in some situations or countries. And most importantly, noticing and wanting to support those brave pioneers I saw who were making a difference locally. So I joined Out and Equal in 2018 with a lot of excitement for our global programs and for working with partners and companies who are doing the bold work of creating workplaces where all employees feel like they really belong. Since we couldn't be there, unfortunately, in person for the 2019 China Forum, it was particularly important for us to underscore our commitment to you and to ensuring our work together moves forward and becomes even stronger. And it doesn't end there. I look across all the work we're doing globally and how strong these partnerships have become in India, Brazil, and further throughout Latin America. It's important to draw upon these memories, our professional connections that have often become friendships, and to be inspired by just how much more we can do in solidarity, especially in this health crisis when there is so much fear and uncertainty. What we do in this health pandemic and its aftermath is even more important than before. If we look around on our social media or televisions, we see and hear stories of incredible kindness, humanity, and generosity. We also know that not everyone has someone and are potentially more at risk for isolation and disconnection. In this new context, I ask you to call upon your bravest selves, to give yourself permission to be an ally or do what you can within your company or organization to promote LGBTQ inclusion. What you do may be big or small, and it can mean and look different things for different people, but indeed, act when and however you can. Give yourselves permission to do that and to be a voice for the community. Now, I would like to briefly thank my staff, in particular Dina, CV, and Karina on the global team, and to Stephen Huey in advance, who will now share his story with you. Stephen?
There you go. Thank you, Erin. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Huey. I'm the Senior Director of Corporate Engagement. I've been with Out and Equal for 7 years now. And prior to Out and Equal, I was at Bank of America for 30 years, and I held several management positions throughout my career. I'm Chinese American, and I was raised in the late 1950s and 60s when there was a lot of discrimination against Asian Americans, specifically Chinese Americans in the United States. The Chinese were the first wave of Asian immigrants to come to America, and I actually have ancestors that date back to the Transcontinental Railroad in the mid-1800s. In fact, May is Asian American Heritage Month here in the US, and it coincides with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad that was built by Chinese immigrants in the 1860s. My father was an immigrant and came to the United States from Canton, China. He was 10 years old. It was during the Chinese Exclusion Act, and he was detained for 2 months at Angel Island, which is a detention center located on an island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. 175,000 Chinese immigrants came through Angel Island, and they were detained for weeks or deported back to China. In any case, Chinese Americans have a legacy of exclusion, isolation, discrimination, alienation. My dad was sent by his family to protect him from kidnapping during a time of political and social upheaval, and was to return to China when it was safe to do so. But it turned out that he never saw his family again. So that experience for him has lived with me throughout my life. On the other hand, my mom is 5th generation Chinese American. So there's this duality, this dual identity of being Chinese by ethnicity and American in terms of self. I've always felt a consciousness about being different, but also proud of those differences. So growing up, my parents persevered, although there was a petition to keep us out of the neighborhood that my parents chose to buy a house in. I always felt different. I always felt that I was an outsider. When you have an Asian face, you can't hide your ethnicity. And as a kid, I was sometimes called names or harassed by, for being Chinese. There'd be a lot of jokes, things about being Chinese, mocking the Chinese language, stereotypes about being Chinese, and I wasn't seen as Chinese American or American. Things like, where do you come from? Where do you really come from? Go back to China. It always hurts, it stings, and it stays with you. So we fast forward to today, and we're seeing similar behaviors with COVID-19. Even before the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese people were accused of being carriers of VD, leprosy, and other diseases. And so living under today's COVID-19 public health crisis, it's being labeled the Chinese virus, and it puts all Chinese Americans, all Asian Americans at risk. And as an out gay Asian 20-something, living in San Francisco in the 80s, I was that young Asian American gay guy who felt the danger of being singled out for being Asian, gay, or both. There were violent attacks against gay men for fear of HIV and AIDS, and now there's violence against Asians for fear of COVID-19. So I look at my dad's life about facing the unknown, that he hoped to return to China after 2 years, but never saw his family again. I looked to my dad because he was resilient, he stayed focused, and had a sense of purpose and responsibility, I think, for making a better life for future generations. And my mom, I looked to her for her confidence, for being open and honest, and being visible and not afraid to stand out. The Chinese name my dad gave me is New Beginning. And there's a lot of honor as well as weight in that name. I was named to be that promise for my family, and so I carry that with me in many ways. I keep in mind his principles in some ways, his expectations that I be my best. Sometimes that means working harder, sometimes that means being a little more careful about how I treat others. But I think always feeling that you must demonstrate a certain level of integrity. And my parents taught me what has become my motto, that you need to function in disaster and finish in style. When I think about belonging, I didn't have a coming out experience. I was lucky because I could be me. I did first meet my first boyfriend in college, so I guess that was my way of coming out. But I was very fortunate because no one turned away from me, not friends nor family. But professionally, it was harder to experience belonging. I had to have a strategy in order to be seen and acknowledged. And early on, I remember managers had little confidence in me. They told me I was too quiet. I didn't fit the mold. I knew I had to work harder. I knew I had to learn quicker, know my stuff, strive to be better. So being Asian helped me build armor in some ways. I already knew what discrimination felt like. So when it came to my sexual orientation, I never felt the need to hide who I am or be someone I'm not. So what was great was that actually in the end, I kind of became the Asian guy who happened to be gay, And with each new assignment, with each promotion, I knew I belonged. And so the only thing that I would want to share for people that are sharing kind of like the similar life that I have is to really be visible. Your voice matters. Embrace your diversity. Always be willing to represent and pave the way for others. So that's my story. Now I'll turn it back to CV.
Stephen, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you, Erin, as well, for your inspiring words. This was the perfect start to the webinar. Thank you both. It's really interesting to have this kind of full-rounded perspective of you, Stephen, your experience as a Chinese American, and now turning it over to our friends who live in Shanghai and are doing really amazing work on LGBTQ inclusion there with Shanghai PRIDE, our partner organization. And I just want to highlight how much this partnership means to Out and Equal and to me personally. You both growing into friends as well and working with you these past few years. So I'm going to turn over to Shanghai PRIDE in a moment, and we'll have a discussion about inclusion and belonging in China and what businesses can do. And I also encourage you to use the chat box through this conversation. You know, feel free to join in at any moment with your thoughts, with your questions, because we really want to hear from you. And at the end, and maybe throughout a little bit, we'll read some of the comments and questions that we get and address them. So let me stop talking and turn it over to Curtis and Charlene, and you two can introduce yourselves.
Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'll just do a quick introduction about myself. My name is Charlene. My pronouns, she, her, hers, and I'm one of the founders of Shanghai PRIDE. So Shanghai PRIDE started in 2009, sort of like a social event. And now after 12 years almost, we have kind of turned into a movement to help connect with LGBTQ community, with governments, as well as businesses. We'll let Curtis introduce himself first.
早上好, or good morning to you all. So my name's Curtis, originally from Florida, but been living in China for 6.5, almost 7 years. Time flies. So as part of Shanghai PRIDE, I'm on the executive team and really focused on corporate engagement and getting our companies to be more inclusive in their workspaces. And then on my day job, I work with the Walt Disney Company here in Shanghai in the corporate office doing HR recruitment and lead our Disney PRIDE employee resource groups. And my pronouns are he and him.
Awesome, thank you. And I think to get us started, it would be really cool to know where everyone is dialing in from. So if you don't mind using the chat box really quickly to let us know where are you calling in from, either what country, what city, both, and I'll start reading them. Oh, wow, okay, so we have someone from Australia, DC, Denver, some other cities in the US here. We have Shanghai, these are coming in quickly, Beijing, Hong Kong, the Philippines.
Chengdu.
Yes.
San Francisco, New York
Help
City.
me keep track.
Guangzhou, Dallas.
Malaysia, nice. India. Oh, wow.
Hi, Donna. A board member, Donna Rose.
I was just going to recognize
Hey,
Donna.
Donna.
Hey, Donna. I'm so glad you're here.
Toronto.
Nashville, my hometown.
Oh, wow. Wow, this is, yeah, this is so cool. That's always fun to know. Thanks for chatting that in, and continue to use this chat box the whole time. Send us your comments. So let's go ahead and get started with this dialogue. Curtis and Charlene, we were in our conversations that we've been having recently, wondering if you can kind of guide us through dispelling this sort of myth around the fact that, you know, LGBTQ D&I work is either maybe too difficult, too daunting, too scary to really robustly implement. in China. But what are the reasons that maybe you might be hearing that? And why is that not necessarily true?
Okay, I'm going to comment on that with regards to a more general view. So some of you may or may not know that in China, being LGBTQ is no more in the list of crime, and also it's out of the list of mental disease. So technically, it's okay to be LGBTQ. Having said that though, there are currently no policies yet to protect LGBTQ from discrimination and so on. So, you know, if you look at it that way, hey, there could be, you can do something to help employees or members of the community in this country, right? However, why do we think that, or some of us, or most of us here think that policies cannot be implemented or ERGs cannot be started in companies in China? And that's because also that the way we grew up in our thinking is very, we are put into a box already, right? Whereby a family, and you have parents, mom, one has to be a mom, one has to be dad, and then the kids, and so on. So there is a little bit of, if we talk about LGBTQ, then it's a little bit out of the normal, so to speak. And therefore it's something new, or rather it's new in the present talk in corporations. So there is a little bit of apprehension in that. But you know, there are some corporations who have already started implementing policies or even started talking about LGBTQ in the workspace, and some have successfully started ERGs. And I think Curtis can talk more about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of times so I've been in China for 6.5 years, and I come from Orlando, which is very friendly, very much a rainbow. I think Orlando has 2 prides a year, because so friendly and open. And then when you shift that to coming to here, to me, it was just something like, oh, why aren't we doing this? So it's a lot about, I think for me, from personal, I think we have to help our companies to think globally, but impact locally. And to kind of unpack that means, you know, if you're here in China, you have to help your colleagues that maybe your HQ, your headquarters are in the US or in the UK or in Australia. You have to help them know, because they only know what's around them. And so when you're living here, you have to educate them. You have to bring them to know that cookie cutter D&I doesn't work. You know, so you have to think, you know, keep them globally thinking. So they want to think about what's going on in China, but then impacting that locally. So what does that look like here? You know, and sometimes for us, when we got started in Disney here in China about 3 or 4 years ago with our employee resource ERG, we realized we had to start from a foundational educational level. We had to define what is L, what is G, what is B, what is T, Q, what do those letters actually mean in English and in Chinese. And for me, I mean, kind of relating back to Stephen's story, it was, you know, sometimes it's seen as a foreign concept, but this has been around for years and years. You know, I mean, it goes back to the Qing dynasty where Dafan, where the emperor cut off his sleeve of his male lover, you know. So it's demystifying some of those things. But the thing here too is what you do internally as a company does not dictate what goes on the outside. So what you do internally is about just creating that feeling, that educational level. And the first thing to do is just to get started talking. And sometimes it's safer bringing the outside in. And that's what we did at Disney's, that, you know, we brought Shanghai PRIDE in. That was kind of our first relationship builder there, was because it was easier to bring someone from the outside, and it's less threatening. It's less of that, you know, it's still, there's a distance. So it's a safe spot, a safe space. Because what you want to do is just to gradually bring that conversation to where people realize the most important thing is that it's real stories with real people can make a real impact. So it's demystifying LGBTQ and making it real about, oh, this is Curtis, or this is Xiaofan, or this is Yao Yao, you know. So you bring in those names that make, you know, I'm gay. And then it really begins to break down those barriers and those walls.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing, putting a face to the name or to the identity or anything like that, yeah, absolutely. That's such a huge piece of it. And you know, when you say thinking globally and acting locally, I wonder if you can just elaborate that on or sorry, elaborate on that a little bit. Maybe give folks examples of some actions they can take, or perhaps tips of how to gain support to go ahead and act locally. You kind of got into it there, but I wonder if there's a couple maybe more kind of concrete steps that folks can take away.
I think from a Shanghai Pride, one of the like key highlights, like the biggest like bronze moments, was last year when we walked in World Pride in New York. And it was the first time Shanghai Pride had walked in New York. And as we're walking, you know, people are saying Shanghai Pride, Shanghai has a pride, you know, and it was this amazing, just like I got goosebumps just now saying that, you know, and so that's helping that global thinking. But what does that mean locally? You know, I mean, we're not, if you're here in China, you know that we're not able to have parades here. But, comma, that's not a full stop. But what we are able to do, you know, is that we are able to do arts, educational sessions, webinar, you know, different things, culture, different things of that aspect to really help educate, to keep going. So it looks different here, you know, because we want to build a community here, you know, and so, and whether that be in the companies or in the community like Shanghai Pride, but then it's helping to relay that to our HQ, to those who are in the US, you know, so it's helping to educate them, you know, what practices are here, especially if you're thinking about benefits. You know, some benefits just are really difficult to make here, or to get, just because of the political or the cultural or the legal confines, you know, so it's not using those stop using those as an excuse, but looking and using those as, okay, what can we do? For example, here in China, we can give marriage leave. So our company, if you marry your partner, you know, so you can get 10 days annual leave or marriage leave. My friends in the US are like, that's crazy, that's amazing. You know, so that's one of the benefits, you know, and that's dictated by the government as marriage leave, but then it's up to the companies to actually interpret that. So we just had an employee who got married in January to his husband, and he got marriage leave, you know, because of that, because that's left up to the company. So that's one of the unique things about here in China. But then it's also, if you're boots on the ground here, sometimes you do have to stand up. You have to use your voice and just say, you know, speaking to that and building that relationship with your global, with your HQ, and saying, this is great, this is fantastic. This doesn't work in China this way, but this is a way that we can take this. Or sometimes saying, you know what, it's a 4 a.m. D&I call. I'm sorry, I can't make that 4 a.m. call. You know, and it's just helping people to shift, because if it's out of mind, out of sight, you know, and there's nothing wrong with standing up for yourself and saying, you know what, can we do a 6 a.m. call instead? And so it's just helping to educate and sharing your experience and not being afraid to share. But I think one of the biggest tools as well here is having an executive sponsor in a company, is having that sponsor who's going to say, you know, use their position, use their power, use their prestige or their title to open more doors for you. You know, and I know Charlene has got some great experience, as well as how we work as well with consulates, with other companies and so forth.
Yeah, I think, yeah, when it comes to think globally, act locally, we got to have a concept that, for example, if it's a corporation, right, a concept that embraces inclusivity all around the world in all the offices. But then act locally means that we have to bring these policies to make sense in terms of local languages. For example, also like, what could you say, benefits for marriage leave. You know, although here we do not have same-sex marriage yet, hopefully. But yes, the company can implement these and can discuss and implement these policies within the companies. Also, for example, partner insurance benefits, right? I was very surprised in my previous company, and I'm sure some of you have heard this before. I was very surprised that my wife, we are officially married in the US. She was given insurance coverage, and it's up to the companies, within the companies, to discuss, let's say, with their insurance partners. So there are many ways that companies can be more locally inclusive, and it's up to, again, it's really up to all levels, right, of the corporate organization to come together and come up with a better solution, or the best practices and the best solutions for everybody. It's just like whatever works somewhere else doesn't mean that it will work here, vice versa. However, we can always find a solution.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's something that us as a group and in general, we've heard from partners, is trying to get this conversation to permeate through all levels of an organization. And sometimes it feels like it's concentrated in either it's like the executive folks and it's not getting anywhere else, or it's the ERG leaders. And a solution that I've heard a lot that I think is an amazing one is the power of allies in helping spread those conversations. To me, you know, an ally is just that. It's someone that uses their position or privilege to counter discrimination against LGBTQ people and promote inclusion. So I wonder maybe if you can touch upon that a little bit about what that means within the context and why it is critical for companies to create environments that encourage allyship.
You know, well, here we spend a lot of time at work, right? Mondays to Fridays, 9 to 5, sometimes even longer. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes we work, we call it OT, overtime, over the weekends, over public holidays sometimes. So we do spend a lot of time with people we work with, more than the people that, you know, we live with. So, and I find, having worked in Asia for like 20 over years, we talk about everything to our colleagues. Sometimes even more, we share more things with our colleagues than with people who are really close to us, like families, right? And it is important that the people that we talk with, we work with, we spend 12, 14 hours a day. Okay, I won't say 12, 14 hours, 8, 10 hours a day to understand each other and to be comfortable around each other. Before I came out completely, it was difficult because I had to hide who I was, and lunchtime was difficult because I always have to talk about my boyfriend and the type that I like. So, you know, why allies is so important is because they're going to help you, help me to understand, okay, it's okay, I can talk about my family, what I did over the weekend. Because here in Asia, we share a lot about our families. Allies need to also know what it means to be LGBT, the difficulties that we face, and what are the things that help us to be more comfortable. I think the concept of ally is still quite new here. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't promote it. I think we should definitely talk about it. And how it will work is also very important, because I know for a fact that in some of the ERGs that we tried to start, or we've started here, we promote the ERG as ally-based first. Like, we talk about allyship. You say, hey, this is ERG to support LGBTQ staff, but you don't have to be LGBTQ to be part of this ERG, right? Come as an ally, come find out what it is about. And Curtis is going to tell you later that most of the people who come being allies, you know, they come out to him. Is that right, Curtis?
I think that's one of the funny things. For a long time, when we started our ERG in Disney here in China, I was the only one, you know, the only one, you know, so I got to carry the token, as Stephen mentioned earlier. But what it is, you know, as our group grew, it was a lot of allies, you know, and the allies really can use, you know, they don't only stand beside you, but sometimes they stand behind you, but then a lot of times they also stand before you, and they open those doors that maybe they can only open because of their privilege, because of their relationships or what have you. But it was funny how, as our group has grown over the times, more and more allies feel more comfortable with themselves, and later come out and identify and says, yes, I feel like, well, actually, I'm not an ally. Actually, I'm a member. I'm one of them. I'm one of you. I'm one of us. And that talks about that inclusive feeling, you know, that talks about that feeling of belonging that's so important that we create, whether that be like through a Shanghai Pride or through your company. You know, that allyship. I mean, our executive sponsor is one of our strongest allies. you know. And then also sometimes here, I think, and probably everywhere, but strongly here as well, sometimes allies they risk being labeled as, oh, you're an ally, so you must be gay, you know. And so it's demystifying and taking that taboo. And I think a lot of times that's why for us, at least in our office, in our employee resource group, we try not to identify, like some will have like ally pins, because we want everyone to be seen on an equal level, so it doesn't matter. You know, we have one ally and everyone's like, oh, he's part of Pride? Does that mean he's, I was like, does that mean he's what? Yes, that means he's supportive of inclusion. He's supportive of equality, you know. And so it's just having those conversations. And then also I think for allies, it's important to have honest conversations, and to ask those awkward conversations, those awkward questions that you may have, to those, and just simply say, you know, whatever those questions are that you can have that can be sometimes uncomfortable. Maybe that's more of a one-on-one, but that can really help to educate those. So, but yeah, it's funny how our allies join and then they feel comfortable enough and then they eventually come out.
You know, the other thing I just wanted to add is that it's what do employers need to know? You know, for many employees, sometimes they can't be out at all in their personal lives, but they have friends and people they're close to, and they're actually out at work. So there's that dynamic as well. And, you know, I think that's where employers can really understand the value of allyship.
Yeah, to kind of reiterate what Curtis was saying, Ivy Wong in the comments says, I do come out every day just because I am an active and passionate in promoting LGBT+ inclusion. And that's totally it. Allies have to come out too. You know, and to again reiterate something you were saying, Curtis, is kind of that token role. A lot of times I'm the only non-binary trans identifying person in the room, and I don't know where I would be without allies. Sometimes I need other people to kind of carry that conversation and be a voice when I'm just feeling a little tired, you know, and you know, enforce that feeling of belonging when I have allies in the room. So yeah, shout out to all the allies. Thanks for doing what you do. Speaking of
CV, I think that's a good point, that even within the community, we have allies within the allyship within the community.
Exactly.
You know, and that's a beautiful, you know, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, for me, a huge, you know, and I'm growing in my learning in the trans space. You know, I want to be a strong ally and I want to learn, and we're all in this continuous journey and learning curve. And I think that's the great thing too, is realize that we have allies even within the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it is a continuous journey for all of us. So, and I say that to people who are allies or wanting to be stronger allies, like we're all learning together. So don't feel like afraid to ask questions, as long as it's a kind of safe space to do so. Yeah, speaking of, you know, allies and standing together and being proud, I know that as things are starting to kind of open back up in Shanghai, I know that there's still some things happening to celebrate Pride. And can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that might be happening and that folks can look forward to?
Well, on Sunday, May 17th, it's International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, Biophobia. So it's a Hobbit Day. And every year since about 5-6 years ago, we've been commemorating this day by organizing a bike ride. So on Sunday, we will be riding from 6 different locations. And why 6? It's representing the 6 colors of the Pride rainbow flag. And we'll be meeting at a restaurant for brunch. So that is when we are going to form the rainbow. So we will have the different colors grouped. I will take a photo. It's one of our 2 coming out events of the year. So it will be interesting to see what's going to happen, because things are almost back to normal here, like business as usual. But we will see what brings on Sunday. And then this will lead up to Pride Week, which is going to be in the middle of June. So we are still planning for Pride, because I know everybody is asking. Yes, we're still planning for Pride. Of course, a lot of things that we have to consider, like for example, people who come to attend, they have to pre-register first. And then when they're at the venues, get the temperatures checked, show our local Shanghai QR code on the phone to say that we are safe, we are healthy. So taking precautions on a lot of things and working with venues also to take these precautions. Yeah, it'll be interesting. We'll keep you updated, of course.
Yeah, check out the website. I put the website for Shanghai Pride so you can follow our events for the rest of June as well. So as we, we're being cautious, we're being wise, but we're also continuing. So if we have to pivot online, then stay touched. But check out the website I put there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Pride is, I think, I'm so glad to hear that you're doing all of those things. On a global scale, Pride looks different in some places now due to the current crisis. But I know, for example, in DC, the parade itself won't be happening. But as my banner back here, let's see if I can't point to it. Banner here says Pride is never really canceled, right? So sure, we can't go out to the parade, but we're doing small things that we just doing what we can. So for example, my friends and I, we're just gonna organize some group chats and just talk to each other and be with each other that way virtually. So in the chat box, it would be really fun to see what you all are doing. Maybe Pride is in full swing, and if it's not, perhaps we can share ideas about what we can do to celebrate virtually, or just like to have a personal day and be nice to yourself that day. Yeah, so let's see. And our panelists, if you have like some kind of me time things that you're going to do for Pride, or things with friends or chosen family, you can let us know too as the chat box rolls in.
Yeah, I think one thing too that we're pivoting, we usually have in Disney, we have a big Pride month and we try to do different things. But what we found that works here better than, in some of our other locations globally is that we call them Pride Talks. And we do the same thing with Shanghai Pride, but it's really about those stories. So we invite various folks, and as you're doing that, it's important to get the local voice. And I think as we are on this journey and we're learning how to do things differently, how we're doing things locally. One thing that we did last year was that we brought a local mom and son to share their story. And it was everyone was super engaged, but it was great because it wasn't, someone from the outside. It wasn't an expat, or it wasn't, a Uyghur or a foreigner. But it was really the local voice. And that's where it seemed to really click. And it's a simple thing where you bring, whether it's an employee or someone like a Shanghai Pride or another organization, but to bring that local voice, and therefore your local employees can really connect. And that was one of the most impactful. Funny, still one of the most popular as well. But don't be afraid to bring that in, moderate that, have a little conversation. So that's what we're pivoting to mainly this year. We have 2 Pride Talks that we're going to be having virtually, so that way we can also connect with our other offices here in Greater China. And just having those simple conversations, because whether you're still working at home, if you're pivoting around that way, but this is also a really great way, the silver lining, I think we've talked about this before in other calls, is that this is also a great way for those who don't feel comfortable yet showing up physically, that they can still show up virtually, and it's a safe space. And that's a really, really great way to where they can just kind of tiptoe in to their comfort level. And so maybe they're not ready to identify themselves, or they're not ready to wear the rainbow badge, but they can still log in and say, wait a minute, I see myself in this person, or I see myself in this story. And that can really give them that motivation, give them that courage, and also just give them that inspiration to be their authentic self. So those are some things that we're doing here that was really impactful.
Curtis, I really like when you said that you brought in local stories, and to everybody, there is an official or an unofficial number. 5% of the population is LGBTQ. And if you do some math of the 1.6 billion people here, That's a lot of people. Like, my math is bad, 70 million or something like that. That's like as 3 times of the city of Shanghai. So, and you know, right now, most of them are in the working age. So they are the ones who'll be spending a lot of time in the office, like I said earlier. So these people, you know, we can get stories out from them, and we hope that they can be comfortable and be who they are at their workplaces. So this also ties in back to act locally, right? Getting the local stories, getting the locals to tell their stories about themselves, and not really outing them, but if they feel comfortable to do so. And then we will find that this whole LGBTQ community is not like a far away thing, not a foreign concept. So we have to use that, leverage that for all of us, for ourselves, and to implement that in companies.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to turn it over to a question that we received. It actually sort of relates to that, Charlene. And then to the rest of you listening in, still feel free to send in your questions or just comments, ideas, and we'll kind of have an open chat about it now. The first question is from our friend Sophie, actually, and who says, I frequently hear from multinational corporation leaders outside of China who are keen to drive LGBTQ inclusion there, but who may not have spent much time in the country. They often report becoming discouraged or frustrated when folks don't come out following the launch of, you know, the LGBTI inclusion initiatives or activities on site. So could you talk a bit about what a corporate launch process might commonly look like in China, and what folks outside of China should realistically expect, and what progress milestones might look like in China?
This is a great question, Sophie, and I'm happy to jump on this and kind of just share from my personal experience and what we've done here. And so part of this being the outsider, being the foreigner and getting this started, sometimes you have to really just be aware, and it's a learning journey. And I've made mistakes, but we've learned from those mistakes. My biggest key has been having my executive sponsor. It's our vice president of HR, and she is an ally, and she's super strong, and she's super passionate about seeing this. And so we've had dialogues, but it's been really to making sure that it's not the expat group, because there is sometimes that concept of it being a foreign concept. So to make sure that it's not that foreign, that foreign group or that foreign, that you're really engaging. But also we need to be respectful, and it's kind of a it's kind of a yin yang of wanting to get those folks to come in. And that's why the ally part is very, very important, especially locally, is to engage those allies so that they come in and then eventually they do feel more comfortable identifying themselves. So for us, we started it very grassroots, very organically. My boss is a strong ally as well and supporter. And we just started it honestly with having like what I did was I engaged our US team and getting some swag, some fun rainbow Mickey stickers. And we literally took a Friday where we encouraged everyone to wear colorful, bright colors. We passed out rainbow Mickey stickers. And, I was excited, like, yes, everyone's going to understand, So everyone's like, yes, I'm very excited to join. I love Disney. I'm proud to be part of Disney. So I'm Disney Pride. So that was a quick shift for me to realize, okay, wait a minute. We haven't done the foundations, that we have to go back to the educational level. And what does the rainbow significant, what does it represent? Why is it significant, especially within the community? And so, and we've had some of those conversations. So it's really important to get those folks that are on the ground, that are in these offices engaged, whether that be from an HR level or from an executive level, so that they can drive the momentum here. Because it is hard to drive that from the outside, because then it still seems like that external influence, that giving them support, but also for those who are externally, maybe you're in Singapore, maybe you're in the UK, maybe you're in Australia, and you want to drive that here in the US, it's finding those people that are here and saying, how can we help you? Here's some resources that we've done here, but how does this translate? How does this customize, how does this make sense in your community? You know, and it's walking that and sometimes having very uncomfortable conversations, but it's just simply starting with baby steps. You know, yes, I would love for us to be way more advanced. I would love for us to have trans benefits right now here. I would love for us to, you know, be having more of those things, but it's step by step. And once you look back at those baby steps are still progress forward. So it's building that community, it's building those people. The biggest thing is building that community relationship here and creating that ownership here. And it's gonna take time. Yes, I've been super frustrated myself, just saying, you know, but then you look back and you have to shift that and look at the progress that you do have. So now I can walk in my office and I see rainbow Mickey stickers, for example, and I know that now they know what that means, but it's taken some time. It's taken 3-4 years to understand what that is. So I hope that answers your question a little bit there, Sophie.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in also to say more about this. I started an ERG in a local firm, local office of my firm, previous firm. So it does get frustrating. So don't get me wrong, it's not easy, right? Like, boom, you have 100 people join your ERG. No, it doesn't work like that. What we do is, I think in even as Shanghai Pride, right, as a community, we have to first raise awareness and talk about it, and talk about it really in communities. I find that talk about it has to come from top down, right? Once we have executive sponsor coming in from the top and say, okay, you know, we're going to talk about this today. This is LGBT, what it means. Set up the newsletter. People read about it, and then they'll think about it. Then the next step is say, okay, we're going to have a lunch session, and allies are welcome. And you know what? When it comes to food, we will go and attend. So that's when we start to talk more, maybe have a guest speaker. Curtis is right, getting someone from outside first to come in and talk about their stories. It works, it helps a lot. Then after that, we will say, okay, you know what, why don't we get together and then do some activities. Maybe 1 year we visited a hospital focused on HIV and AIDS. So that was one part of it. And the people who went, they learned a lot, and they were like, oh, wow, we should have done this earlier. Where can we find more information, and so on. So these are it has to be step by step. It will take time. So do not get frustrated at the very beginning. I'll definitely need an executive sponsor or sponsors. And then we definitely need 1 or 2 who from the grassroots level, so to speak, to push it from both sides. Yeah. And also maybe give ourselves some targets or KPIs. So you know what, in 3 months, what do you want to do? And then measure ourselves so we can see how the progress is.
Exactly, yeah. And Curtis, I saw you kind of responded to this in the chat, but not sure if you had anything else to add. And Charlene, specifically to starting an ERG when no one is out. That was another question that came in, which we sort of touched upon, but I wanted to give you the chance to say anything else to that.
And I think that's a really typical, you know, and we've heard, even I heard and was like, oh, you're the only one here, so why do we need to do this? You know, and like I said, and now, you know, our group has grown, you know, and it is hard because you want people to feel safe, and you have to create that environment first. It's kind of the chicken or the egg concept here with that when someone's not out. And that's why for us, like in Disney, it was important for us to partner with Shanghai Pride at first to bring those stories from the outside in. And this is, you know, and it was simple. Charlene and the team was sharing about, you know, what is LGBT? What does that mean? And it was bilingual, which was very important and essential, but also talked about what are the, you know, the confines of what's culture, what are the laws, what are protection, what is, you know, and all this stuff, kind of give an overview of LGBT in China. And so it wasn't as threatening, and it was kind of just easily closer and closer. And then post following up with that, you know, it's in part of our culture in the company is D&I is very important. Inclusion is very important. So you keep those conversations going. Maybe they're in conversation, or you also link up with your global D&I and see what is possible. You know, what resources do they have that you can partner with? And maybe it's just reiterating that, but it's also important to reiterate that in your local language as well. So being bilingually so that you're reaching everyone in that. because eventually, and that executive sponsor, I know we keep hitting that, the executive sponsor, but they can really use, you know, their position, their power, and also their budget.
Yeah, I see a question here from Melody about how do you respond to criticism about LGBT plus movement neglecting intersex and asexual people? I will answer this in terms of the context in China, right? You know, LGBT, if we talk about LGBT in China, a lot of people still do not know what each alphabet means, right? So that's why we either use LGBTQ or LGBT plus. And for our introduction, normally we will say that LGBTQ, or we use the Q to represent all the alphabets behind, or some of us use plus. We do not address directly. So far, to be honest, we have not heard any criticism, at least in mainland China. But what we want to say is also that right now, we are still in the process of explaining the L, the G, the B, and only recently have we started to raise more awareness about T. So it will take time for us to talk about I, A, and the other A's and the other P's after that. But what we want to say is that when we introduce Shanghai Pride or LGBTQ, we say that, you know, these are not all. And then we will do a one-page summary and say, okay, what I means as versus what T means, right? All these information. So I think for us is we're still at a very early stage in China, talking about LGBT as a whole. So I'm sure that question, when we see it, I think we will have to address it when we get there. But at the moment, we will be saying to everybody who probably will ask us and say that, you know, we are still at this level, at this early stage. We will be addressing that. Maybe you can share, someone from the US can share how it is right now. How are you addressing that? Questions on intersex, asexuality, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe the person who wrote this might actually know, but for all of you kind of logging in, I do encourage you to take a look at Interact, looking up their website now, which is interactadvocates.org. They're a really amazing NGO. They do global work specifically on intersex and more so focused around intersex youth. And that conversation in the US, I wish it was more visible, but sometimes it's not. And that goes the same for asexual folks and the other kind of acronyms in the, letters in the acronym. However, I'd say now there's a really heightened focus on trying to pay more attention to that and do these cross collaborations with folks who are working on those issues. So thank you for the question, and thank you for bringing it up. And I'm actually seeing someone here, it's Flo, in the chat saying at EI, we are focused on gender fluidity and trans support. This includes understanding intersex in the bigger gender identity understanding. Yeah, intersex, you know, is actually, it's a sex characteristics. So folks, you know, have different chromosomes, internal anatomy, hormones, different variations occur in different people. And that's really what it is. Yes, thank you so much for your question. So actually, we've only got 4 minutes left, and I feel like this conversation could keep going longer, but we'll definitely be sure to do more global engagements around China and the APAC region. We'll bring each other back online and continue this conversation for sure. But maybe if you wouldn't like Stephen, Charlene, Curtis, and Erin, if you just want to give a quick closing words, and then we'll sign off.
Can I invite our guests? Does everybody want to say a few words before I do?
I want to say that I think it's really important. Like, thank you all for joining your morning, evening, afternoon, whatever part of the time. But, you know, I think for companies, I'm gonna put on my company hat for a minute, it's really important and it's essential. For me, Out and Equal has been that really great, I call it my DNI resort, my retreat where I go, you know, and get filled up, but to learn. But one of the great unique things I think that we find here in Asia is that we find companies sharing their best practices, because it's not a competition that we can sometimes see in the US and the UK, you know, and Out and Equal has brought that together for the past 2 years, and this year again, hopefully, as we look at, you know, the third China forum here. And so this is a great way to stay engaged, but also it's a great way to learn from other companies and sharing best practices, because we ultimately know that caring is sharing and sharing is caring. And so that's been that really great where, you know, the partnership between Out and Equal and Shanghai Pride has really been a beautiful community and a unique perspective that's been here in China, and especially even in Asia and the APEC area. So thank you all for joining, and just really thank you all to Out and Equal for being that partner who's been doing this for over 20 years, and that can give us that wind, you know, beneath our wings. I'm going Bette Midler there.
Well, for me, thank you very much, Out and Equal, for including Shanghai Pride as your partner. And thank you everybody here for joining me and everybody else here this morning, evening, afternoon. So I want to encourage everybody to, you know, talk about LGBT at work. It's okay to talk about it. Take that first step. It really means a lot to someone in your company. At least when I was a much younger employee, I would have appreciated that. And, you know, keep your heads up. It's going to be a better world soon. Everybody, you have to keep safe, keep healthy. Thank you for having us. Thank you for this partnership.
I'll be real quick. I just want to thank you for allowing me to join, but also be a mentor to others. Find ways in which that you can lead the way for others that just don't know how. So, thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll jump in on that. I think, yeah, so many of these themes coming through, you know, small steps, baby steps, just reaching out and having conversations with people, this non-competitive sharing of best practices. It's something we certainly see, you know, as Curtis mentioned, we certainly see it, I think even more so in the last couple of years. There's been a tremendous amount of generosity and people, you know, reaching out to help each other. I think we could not do this work globally in particular without such strong networks and friends like you all. I just really love this conversation tonight, and I promise that when we're together again in person, I will be at the next China Forum. I'm really looking forward to it. We are just so thrilled to count you all in our family, and want to give a small shout out in advance for Summit this year, although we will not be in person, and part of us and our hearts are sad about that. But this actually allows us to possibly enjoy more participation from many more people around the world who might be able to join us for a virtual summit. So we have lots of great things planned. We have specific global things planned that Dina and Stevie and Corinne and the team are going to be working on, and Stephen as well. So please join us if you can. And really, as Charlene said, stay safe and be healthy, and we'll all take care of ourselves and each other until we see each other again in person. So thanks on behalf of the whole Out and Equal family.
Thanks so much, all of you, for joining and for sharing your amazing insights with everyone. For all of you listening in, just so you know, this webinar is going to be recorded, and we'll send it out to you in an email, and it'll also be up on our website. So encourage you to share it if anyone you know missed it and wanted to join. Thanks again, and we'll chat soon. Bye.